Hi, and welcome to the Route to CISO Podcast. It's me, Chris Rides. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to be chatting to seasoned Chief Information Security Officers about their career journeys. We're going to be unencrypting their real-life stories and searching for the hidden keys to help you fast-track your cybersecurity career. And I'm really excited to have Melina Scotto with me today. Melina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. I'm delighted to be here.
This is going to be real fun because we've been on the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Centre's Industry Advisory Board. Wow, that was a mouthful for a long time together. And so it's going to be lovely to hear all about your career because we don't really get to talk about this sort of stuff.
No, that's all right. There's never any time for that.
Good stuff. Well, look, I think probably a great place to start is maybe give a little bit of an overview of what you're doing currently, please.
Oh, certainly. My husband and I started a veteran-owned and women-owned cybersecurity consulting company called Maston and Associates. We have our first scope of work with the National Institutes of Health, which is, thank you, where I cut my teeth in a lot of cyber engineering labs and teams, and I'm thrilled to be there as a true contributor right now. So very exciting.
Well, congrats. Going out on your own, I know from personal experience, is a huge step, right?
It is. It has been not exactly what we expected. It does take longer, as people say, than you think to get these things off the ground. But really happy to see that the wheels are turning now.
Good. Yeah. Well, congratulations. It's a huge step, and there'll be many twists and turns. I'm sure there's a lot of great things about. There's a lot of really tough stuff that people do when you've been an employee or you've done that for a long time before you go out on your own. So I understand the challenges of it. So best of luck with it.
Thank you. I appreciate
it. So I think a great place to start, and a lot of those on the podcast, and we always tend to start around their foundation. So like a little bit about what they were doing before they even maybe got into cyber, because there's so many people out there that are looking to break in and so many different backgrounds that they do that from. So yeah, I'd love to know more about yours, please.
Sure, certainly. I began in the mid to late 90s as a database manager, old SQL type thing. Very small shop at a .org in Washington, D.C. Very small staff, a pretty small data footprint back then. But the way that it worked was one day your supervisor said, "You're in charge of the network." And I said, "Sure." So these were the old blue screens of Novell, if those on the call remember that. We never called it cybersecurity back then. Maybe we called it border security or firewall or, something like this. And then that allowed me to work on the Y2K, or the nothing burger that turned out to be Y2K, but we worked
Right.
very diligently with the heads of I was in transportation, the .org I was with, to go into some disaster recovery type scenarios, and we were very much the backup for the big WMATA, the big technological and transportation centers, because we could do everything manually. So the underpinnings of that Y2K group became, after 9/11, Department of Homeland Security. So just never thought that would happen at the time, but that's how it all somewhat started. And then that led me to network engineering for many years. That was the start. That was the start of it all.
So did you study? So I love it when you speak about Novell, because I remember the days when I first got into recruiting, if I could find somebody a CNA or a CNE certified person, yes. Well, yeah, I knew I'd place them, sort of thing, right?
I was a CNA. I love a badge. I love a cert. I'm very much a Girl Scout at heart, and as many as I could scramble up to get, particularly that our team would pay for, I was down for that.
Nice, good. And then, so before you even went into the sort of sequel side,
Mhm.
like how did you even get into IT? Did you study it or yeah?
I, you know, I studied both engineering and opera at university, and I really thought that opera was going to be my thing. I would be really big, and I had some real moments, but always as one of a group of a chorale or a choir or chorus. I thought that my Renee Fleming days were right around the corner. But that never really happened for me. But IT databases and the networking, it was always the vehicle through which I could purchase more lessons, right? So I mean, and so for 20 years, I told musicians, hey, whatever you want to do in life, is great, but IT will help you pay for whatever it is you're trying to achieve in music until you hit it big, kind of thing. I think today I would send people toward AI because I do feel like the market is pretty full now with lots of top cybersecurity talent, but it was fresh and new back then, and you just needed a couple of certs, and you could earn just as much as you would, as certainly a professional singer in Washington D.C. But unless you were top of the top, but whereas in music, maybe the top 1% or 0.5% can actually earn a living. At the time, maybe the top 75% of IT workers could earn a living and have a home and raise children and all the things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that do that to follow their
Yeah,
artistic side. They've got to have the more practical side that pays the bills, right? It's very hard to have that.
absolutely. And I find that combination is not so weird. There are a lot of engineers / musicians out there at one of the agencies I worked for. We had a band. We had an IT band, and so it was just fun. It's always brought me joy. I still take lessons, but I think if you have a puzzle solving brain, uh, cybersecurity, IT, will really make you excited to come to work every day.
Yeah, that's what's really funny about that is I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. I've got a couple of music and security stories that kind of go together, but it was 2 or 3 RSAs ago. We ended up on the first night finding a karaoke bar, me and a few of us, and so we made that every night. That was our go-to. It was open up late. That we would end up there every evening after all the events, and every time we went to another event, we'd be like, oh, we're going to the karaoke place now. And we'd bring more people. And it ended up being that it was the central point. By the last day of RSA, it was full of, there must have been 60, 70 people there. And it was all security people that were there for RSA. We took over this little karaoke place that was quiet most nights and basically took it over. It was probably one of my most fun conferences. And we had all sorts of people that were up there singing. Some very, very well known people in our industry that you would never guess were great singers.
I've often wondered, is it a right brain thing? Is it just, I really don't know, but there seemed to be a pretty significant percentage of musicians who are also in cybersecurity, lefties as well, who are also in cybersecurity. So I don't know. We
Yeah.
should do some studies, Chris.
Yeah, we should do. We should look at how this works because one of our most experienced penetration testers, because we've got a penetration testing part of the business. I know probably most well known for the cybersecurity staffing side, but we got a penetration testing part. And Justin, hey Justin, hopefully you're watching this. He's been with us for 9 years now, and great guy, really interesting. He tours with his band. He even took the output from, I think it was a Nessus scan, and gave it notes so it turned into music. Yeah, I don't know what it sounded like. I can't remember now, but yes, that's how he was like.
Genius. Weird and genius. Yeah. I
Exactly.
love it.
Yes, I think if I said Justin was weird and genius, he'd probably appreciate that. actually, as a title. Weird and Genius is a very, very good penetration tester. I can tell you that. He's even done some red team stuff for us where
There's
he's been climbing in windows and climbing up trees and doing all sorts of
That's
fun
it.
things.
There's an art to it, to being able to hack into these systems and think in different
Yeah.
ways. It's not a cookie cutter thing.
No, 100%. Well, there we go. This is a funny way. This is what this podcast kind of all about. We dig into and we have these conversations. We end up going in such random, like, random ways. It's completely like that. Well, that's great. So you're in, you're a Novell network person now, or you were
Right,
back then.
sure.
How did you then progress into more and more sort of heavy security, or even into sort of the leadership? Because that's kind of how most careers tend to move towards.
Sure. You kind of go up the levels, right? Network
Yeah.
engineer 1 and 2, and then then attrition comes in, and that can often help, a single mom's career, right? So the IT manager leaves, and you're the interim, IT manager, and
Yeah.
I guess that's where the leadership came in. I think it was just always being willing to say yes, absolutely, I'll pitch in, I'll take over, for the experience of it, for the resume building, maybe for some more money, but not always. It just kind of depended. But I was excited to get to the next thing and do the next thing and get the next cert. And for me, those kind of we'll call it breaks in title usually happened with a move to a new organization.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a woman in tech thing or if that's an everybody thing, but it just seemed like, even if you were the interim, you weren't going to get picked, as like the follow-on IT manager in your home, right, where everybody knew you as the geeky network engineer, right? They've known you a certain way. So then you get to the next place, and they review all of your credentials and all that, and say, okay, well, now you're the IT manager. And I was moving through kind of securing health data, or in health data, like with an international USAID actually organization, where we've secured international health data on supply chain management for sending antiretroviral drugs to PEPFAR countries. So it was just really important work, really life-saving work, really made you feel, great to get there. And securing these things across borders was really kind of cool and exciting. And, in places where, even, close to 20 years ago now, I can't even believe I'm saying that, close to 20 years ago, the attacks are really wild, and then I moved into domestic healthcare and securing those systems. And that's when I met my first CISSP. And that just really changed my life. Fantastic mentor named Robert Hudock. And he just knew all of these things. He had won Black Hat one year by
Nice.
breaking the electronic kind of the actual charge and power of systems.
Right. Probably like the ICS village or something.
Just blew my little mind. And so I said, well, I said, if I take the test and so forth, would you feel comfortable endorsing me? He was so generous and wonderful. And I think that that's certainly one big bullet point in my career. I've met so many generous, wonderful people that, if you're willing to do the thing or take the next challenge on, you have a whole team of people who are willing to help you if you simply, ask. So Robert was fantastic. I got my CISSP. I caught the bug. And, I didn't pass it the first time. I was a single mom at the time. And this was way back in the day, kids, when you had to get an 80%. There were 250 questions to pass this thing. You had 6 hours. It was all in person with those little fill-in, the dot type tests.
Yeah.
And people would flip out and right next to you. The guy taking the test next to me just kind of kept rubbing his leg with his pencil. 6 hours. It was just nuts. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's come a long way, right? I do absolutely, approve of, okay, 70% is passing now and so forth. There's only 100 to 125 questions now. Whenever you hit 70%, the test is over kind of thing, or it's not. But yeah, I was persistent, and as a single mom and somewhat frugal, I was not about to take a $5,000 class, at the time to pass this thing. I got the book, studied on my own, got what was then a failing grade of 78. I know, but you learn these things, and then and it was cheaper to take the test 4 times or 5 times than to actually take the class with the free test. So I just kind of kept banging away at it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think a second bullet point would be perseverance. Nobody has to know, that is the second time, they all know now, but the second time that you did, the CISO exam that you got above the 80%. But it was, you would have thought, Chris, that I had won Miss America or something. When I got that letter that said that I passed, I just, all day I was, yes, I'm a CISSP. I was so proud of that thing. And then I was a woman possessed. I wanted more, right? So then you take the CISA and the CEH, and I was just a wreck for whatever, certification I could get, because whenever you get one, you need more continuing education credits and all the things. And it seemed easier to just get another pretty shiny, pin or new badge, whatever. So
How did you go about choosing? Sorry, because this is like, there's a lot of people out there that are looking at certifications, and we get quite a lot like which one shall I do? And the CISSP is the one that's we do consistently see in job descriptions, right? It's the most common one. If you have got the experience, brilliant. But how do you pick what you take?
There's so many options, and it kind of depends on what niche you're into, right? Particularly like for neurodiverse folks. So, like I said, Robert really inspired me, and so I wanted to get what he had, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was perhaps a bold move, at the time, considering. But that's what led me to CISSP. After that,
Yeah.
I was like, well, I want to learn I knew Linux. I wanted to learn the real tricky stuff. And so my environment was heavy Linux. So I was like, let me do the CEH, because that had kind of more Linuxy, a little bit more programming, that kind of thing. So that led me to that. And I would say, if you were looking for a guideline in Washington, D.C., it was what the federal government was paying more for, right? So they had very standard job descriptions that aligned with the certifications, and there was just kind of a whole list of them. I wasn't really into, I didn't think I'd be into, maybe I'm more into it now, the audit side of the house, because I had come up from engineering. So not that it wasn't cool and great, and I worked with those folks all the time. I just didn't feel like it was me. I took the CISA just to make sure we were speaking the same language, but I didn't really feel like I was going down the audit path, if you will. But there were certainly federal jobs that were kind of lined up with the CISA, the CISSP, the CEH, the GIAC type certifications, which are just absolutely awesome if you want kind of more of a hands-on thing. But I felt like my day job is a hands-on thing, so people get that I know, and so they took a little longer, and they were more expensive. And so you'll tend to see a pattern in my certs that are kind of the lower cost ones, and that heavily lean on, you need 3 years or this, in engineering, you need 5 years or whatever the case may be. So that's how I chose. Later, as I was, I mentioned federal because I worked for a big federal contractor for about 10 years, and they could bid me for higher paying jobs and jobs with more leadership if I had the cert. whereas you might not fit
Okay.
the qualifications if you didn't have a CISSP. So that's how I moved from the lab and breaking things on the network access control, that type of thing, to, and lots of documentation throughout because I'm a documentation freak, to to more of the leadership roles, because now you checked all the boxes for what the feds were looking for in the contractor cybersecurity roles. And then this terrible thing happened in 2013 where the government closed and contractors couldn't get paid. And still a single mom
Mm.
at the time, I was like,
Yeah.
how am I going to bill? I called up the mothership, if you will, and said, what do I do now? I'm burning through all my PTO. This isn't looking good. I don't know how long it's going to take. They said, well, Melina, you could write proposal language, but engineers hate that. And I said, well, is it a billing code? Because I think I could make myself learn to love that.
Yeah, yeah. Does it pay the bills? It does? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Exactly, Chris. And so, so I started writing language, and I was so shocked by the process. I'd never known what they'd gone through. It's big business with all the capture people and the proposal people, and this kind of what I'll call this beautiful language of cybersecurity, where the feds or whoever your customer is, if you're not in a federal space, right, want rainbows and lily pads and unicorns for $5, from a
Right.
cybersecurity
Yeah.
perspective. And if I can deliver that fantasy solution, right, or the $1 million graphic they were very big into and so forth, to say that my team's rainbows are the most colorful, and my unicorn is the most magical,
The
then
most magical, friendly
right, then
unicorns here on board.
you would win the bid. And I would staff it. I'd say, oh well, we need 20 people to kind of do this thing correctly, kind of thing. And maybe 3 months later they say, well, congratulations, Melina, your language won the bid or whatever. I was part of a huge team, so I was just writing the cybersecurity bits, and lots of other people were involved. But for that part of the work, they said, would you be the transition manager, because you wrote the thing and you have the vision, whatever. I said, sure. They said, here are your 4 guys. I said, I'm sure I wrote 20 people into this.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
all goes to this, and this is kind of across the board, not picking on any one, contractor, but it goes to this awful place after you put this beautiful, pristine solution forward. And this place is called price to win. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you end up losing, a lot of the people, and they said, you'll work it out. And we do, somehow we do. We automate a lot of things, anything that we can, or, we hate to change the scope, but if it's something that, we have to enlarge the scope a little bit, then we do that. But somehow we got it all done. And so I was rewarded professionally for writing better language to get more, you get more money under your belt,
Yeah.
more wins, if you will. And so that led me to kind of, I'll say, the precipice of my first CISO position.
Nice. And how did you get that first position?
It's the craziest story. I still don't believe it when I talk about it. But I was leading cybersecurity in federal health for a couple of $billion company that got eaten up by another multi-billion-dollar federal contracting company. And there was a repeat in this position, that me on my side, and then Sally Sweeney, just a wonderful mentor, I guess the second most important mentor of my career. And she just was doing the same thing that I was on her side of the house. But we overlapped we knew all the same CISOs because we were both in the federal health space. And we certainly were steeped in FISMA, NIST, all of the same frameworks, cybersecurity framework and solutioning, and that type of thing. And so I was super eager to talk to her. And so I called her up and said, "Hey, why don't we just get, an appetizer around the corner and, have a glass of wine and talk cybersecurity?" And she said, "I couldn't think of a better way to spend an afternoon." So we met up, and it was like we were old friends. "Have you ever seen this?" "Yes, I've seen this. What do you think about this? How would you write this?" I mean, it was just, we could have gone on and on and on. I don't think we left. I think we met at 4, and I don't think we left until 10. And it felt like no time had passed at all. I did check with Sally to make sure I could retell this story.
She gave you approval. You got the
Yes,
thumbs up.
yes. But it was just a fun night of just nerding out about, language and the direction of, AI and transitioning to the cloud and all of these things that were kind of popping off. And I walk away from that meeting just thinking, oh, it's going to be so great to work with her. What I didn't know, and then I went kind of on vacation. What I didn't know was
Now, one question for you before you go into, so was she the CISO of the group, and then they'd acquired you, and you were sort of the CISO or head of security? How did that work?
I was the cybersecurity solution lead for federal health and some state stuff, which kind of fell into FedCiv. Anyway, that's how kind of the old way of looking at it was. She was like the deputy CISO, and the CISO had bailed and gone to like another place. I don't know what's going to happen in this mergers and acquisitions. Can be super volatile things. They're like, I'm bouncing. And so she was next in line on her side of the house, but we actually had maybe $1 billion more in contracts on our side of the house. And so, it was this thing where we didn't really know where it was going to land, but I figured I had so many billable hours, I was leading teams in addition to doing the language work. And I never thought of it as a competitive thing. I just figured, certainly they're always going to need strong language. And, my batting average was pretty close to 300, which is pretty good in that field. And so I said, I honestly didn't think about it and didn't know that there was such a thing as a federal health CISO, because that wasn't in my area, that was in hers. And so she knew, she applied for the job. I'm off in Alaska somewhere on one of those awesome cruises that you take with your family. Anyway,
lovely.
So I didn't know what was going on. Meanwhile, she had been interviewing with them for, her boss's position, but also interviewing elsewhere, because who knows how the dice are going to roll, So when turns out she was offered the job, and she turned it down because, she said, I found this other thing and it just seems more aligned. Maybe it's time for me to kind of move on to this other job thing. And she said, but I spoke to Melina. She's just like me. She's leading you in the right direction, same direction I would go. I had no idea. They say it's, all about who you know, but sometimes it's about who knows you, which is kind of a different thing. It's not like I had asked her promoted or, whatever. I just wanted to meet her so we could work better together. But we just resonated so completely in the same frequency that she said, hey, if you want somebody like me, just pick Melina. And so I was asked to apply to this position, and my process was pretty quick. They all knew me. I didn't really have to interview at all. It was just kind of a paperwork thing. And then I had the job. I was very surprised by the title, that there was a chief information security and chief privacy officer of this multi-billion-dollar division. I was just blown away.
Wow, that's there's so much stuff to take out of that. First off, I totally like that getting face-to-face time, the networking, like, it's so important, and probably equally important, because you could have scheduled a 30-minute chat with her, right, and had a conversation, but going and making the time to go and sit down, have a glass of wine or whatever your chosen beverage is, right, and just talk and be able to let that go is so, it's so much more powerful than, we spend too much time just scheduling a little bit here, scheduling a little bit there, and then rushing off one thing to the next. So I think that's a great example.
My only regret is we really didn't get to work together very long. I mean, we had all of these grand plans, and then, life got in the way. But
but the other things when you talked about it's with people, you say like it's all about who you know, and it's actually more about who knows you. That's the first time I've ever had anybody say that. That I don't know whether that's a common saying, but I've obviously heard it's all about who you know, but actually it is about who knows you, because, and especially in the CISO level, because if I look, we do some retained and executive search stuff, but we don't do a lot of it. And I know the companies out there that do just executive search, and the truth is they don't really do a lot of it either. Now, they won't admit that because that's what they do. But what you'll find is most of them, if they only do CISOs, they're actually very small companies. And if not, they're very large companies that do exec searches across everything. And then they have a small person or team that do just CISOs. And so a lot of those positions don't get filled that way. They get filled by the outgoing CISO recommending the next person, right? Or the outgoing CISO having really good succession plans and a good deputy that's ready to step up, or a board member. And you're right, it's all who knows you. It isn't about your relationship with them. It's about their relationship with you. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
Right. It's the difference, I think, between one to many and many to one.
Yeah.
That really can multiply your efforts. But yeah, and it's funny because I do think it was easy for us because we were within the organization already. I think I would almost always prefer, or I found that it seems to go better if you are, lifting somebody up who's been in the organization, who's proven, who knows all of the nuances of your network, since I come from a network thing, or, the decisions that were made, why this looks like this. And it just makes that transition so much better.
Yeah. I mean, you've already got, when you bring somebody in who could be an expert at something, they come in, they've still got to learn about the business. And you'll hear from many hiring managers, and you'll have seen this yourself, that 3 to 6 months for the average person to get settled, even if they know exactly what they're doing from a technical standpoint, right?
That's right.
Meeting the right people, understanding who the stakeholders are, getting to know them and understanding their expectations. There's so many things that you need to do when you take on a new role. That's great. I think actually this may be the perfect time to tie up part one of this. I know we've got so much more to speak about. The great thing for us is that I just say this is going to be end of part one, and then we say stop recording, start recording. This is start of part two, and we just carry on our conversation.
Okay.
But for everyone else, they've got to wait a whole week. There we go. But we'll be back in 1 week. Yes. So thank you for everybody for joining us for the Route to CISO podcast with me, Chris Rides, and Melina Scotto. We are going to be back with part two. So this is the end of part one, and we're going to be back with part two in 1 week's time. It's released every Tuesday. So next Tuesday, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. That's where you'll be able to get this. And thank you for spending the time listening to this particular podcast. Thank you for joining me, Melina, and then we'll start back in a minute.
Sounds good.
Thank you for listening to the Route to CISO podcast. If there's something you really want me to ask on the next episode, or if you're a CISO who wants to inspire the next generation, please reach out. I'll leave a URL to my LinkedIn profile, and make sure you connect and message me there. We're always looking for feedback, so please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.